Good afternoon. Welcome to my draft Viva in English for now, but it will be changed into French. The title of my essay was Délation versus Dénonciation, la France de Vichy pendant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. And the question was, compte tenu l'agenda moral et politique du régime de Vichy, analyse l'interaction entre l'afflux massif d'étrangers, des pénuries et des dénonciations pendant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. So, for the purpose of that essay, I thought first that I would contrast the two words délation and dénonciation. Originally, they had positive and negative connotations for each respective word. The first one, dénoncer, originally had positive connotations, which was that you would stand up publicly and denounce something that was wrong or corruption or something like that. Larousse gives a definition of dénoncer as révéler quelque chose, le fait connaître publiquement comme néfaste. Now, délation is the one with the negative connotations, and that's defined as dénonciation intéressée, méprisable, inspirée par la vengeance, la jalousie, ou la cupidité. So basically, it's done for selfish reasons, and there's nothing good that could come about it. The original problem of distinguishing between the two came about in the French Revolution and the horror. Basically, people tried to get ahead themselves by denouncing other people, usually under false pretenses. So it's interesting to see the repetition of history there. So the research that was available for me for this project was the many archives in French, most of which are available online, at least in part. Many secondary sources, because there's extensive research been done on the subject, university papers, books. There's also an interesting documentary called Le Chagrin et la Pitié, which was done by Marcel Aufus in 1969. That was actually originally banned for 10 years because it challenged the original narrative of the French resistance, and it showed that many French were collaborators and denounced people and things like that. I also used lots of Philippe Pétain's speeches, many of which have been catalogued. There's lots of videos on YouTube of his speeches that were recorded at the time. The main speech that I focused on was his speech of the 1st of January 1942, which is where he underlines the problem of les dénonciations. Among others, of course, there was the black market, traffickers, and people trying to undermine the unity of the French. But the fact that he specifically mentioned les détracteurs systématiques shows how much of a problem it was to the Vichy regime at the time. So the limitations that I came up against were that the majority of denunciation letters, they are available to the public, but you have to go there physiquement, it's called the Salon de Lecture, in the various departmental archives. So I was able to get hold of some, and we have an example here where, interestingly, the writer actually mentions, he says, j'ai horreur de délation, mais, and we see a common theme developing here that these people, they're trying to justify why they're doing these anonymous denunciations. Many of the reasons basically were there was impropriety going on with trafficking in the black market. People were getting extra ration cards and stuff like that. That was normally the pretense of the denunciation, but we really don't know what the real reasons were. They could have often be a jealousy, or it could have been personal problems or something like that. another common theme mentioned is foreigners, specifically Jewish people. The problem with these letters were that even though they were completely anonymous and probably false, these were looked into with a lot more rigour compared to denunciations of just other French people that were anonymous as well. So there's an archive of Haute-Vienne, which was quite accessible. You can see the census data of the time, and you can see the changing in the population of just basically Français de souche, and then you can see more and more foreigners and Jewish people registered there after the German occupation. So we can look at the census data to give an idea of the influx of refugees to various areas. So lots of my sources for the letter of denunciation were secondary sources, which are obviously not quite as reliable, but they are in published books that are under scrutiny. They've been edited. So I thought for the sake of my essay, these sources were acceptable because I combined them with other primary sources. We can presume that academic sources are trustworthy and they've not been made up. And as I said before, there are primary sources available online still. So here's an example of census data. We can see the change in population. This goes back all the way to in the 19th century to provide a really good insight to the change that came about. So for me, I thought that the primary motivations were general xenophobia, and then more specifically anti-Semitism. So there's a quote from one official that said that this was in the Limoges region. He said that many French people in that area had never even seen a Jewish person before the influx of refugees, so that could obviously stoke some community tensions. Obviously there were shortages, des pénuries, so desperate people, desperate times call for desperate measures. That could have been a motivating factor. Also l'égoïsme, it could have been for selfish reasons. Maybe if you got someone locked up, there'd be more goods available for you. The final motivation that I thought of that I should include would be le patriotisme, ou un sens de devoir civique. You see many of the letters are signed un français, un collaborateur français, so there may have been a sense of duty to denounce what they saw as nefarious behaviour. This could be a long shot, but it's important to consider. Okay, now we go on to the contradictions that I came about. So we saw le principe de la révolution nationale. In the rocks, you've got egoism, capitalism. So these principles abhorred selfish behaviour, yet the denunciations gave French people an opportunity to take personal benefits from doing something bad to another. Then we had the encouragement of denunciation by the public figure. So they, on one hand, they were encouraging signed denunciations, and then they were discouraging anonymous ones. And then furthermore from that, they were looking into anonymous ones for Jewish people. Among other things, they were tapping phone lines and stuff like that as well. Then we've got the government's intrusion. So obviously everyone was against government intrusion into their private lives, but by writing a letter of denunciation, and there were almost 5 million, according to some sources, sent during the war, by writing one of these letters, you really legitimise the government's intrusion. And then we had the menace to the Vichy moral agenda. Obviously, if you're doing a selfish act to take personal benefits, you're undermining the Vichy's moral agenda of unity. Although racist denunciations really did support the political agenda of the regime, The final contradiction would be the l'atmosphère clandestine that these letters created. So people were scared to discuss anything in public. They may have more secret meetings and stuff like that, which was a challenge to the regime's authority. And then, as I mentioned before, the Denunciations des Juifs take on a whole different angle. They're really good for the political agenda, but they encourage anonymous denunciations. And what you saw a theme developing in the actual letters is people would mention it's their duty as a French person, and then they'd say about communists or Jews or something like that, because in effect they knew that this would spark an investigation, whether it was true or false. If they wanted these people looked into for their personal xenophobic reasons, they knew it would happen. So you see a lot of things against Jewish people or foreigners written in the letters that could just be some personal dispute. And then another thing that I considered was the prevalence of anti-Semitism before the German occupation. We see the example of the publication La Libre Parole that run from 1892 until 1924, and then it had its legacy after that with other publications. That was a really anti-Semitic paper. Had a publication of 300,000, so we can see that if it sold that many, people were willing to buy it. It was obviously a significant problem in France before. And then we have Siegfried that mentions the anti-Semitism of Pétain, of Laval, and also of Hitler, and that there were three distinct types of anti-Semitism, and it wasn't just Hitler's influence that caused these terrible crimes against Jewish people.